Welcome to a deep dive into the work of Brené Brown,
Okay.
and especially her book, Daring Greatly.
Yeah.
You've given us a real mix of sources this time.
Right.
Excerpts from the book itself,
Right.
some really glowing reviews, and even some background info on Brené herself.
Interesting.
It seems like you want the full picture, not just like a summary.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're going to do today, right?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to dig into this with you.
Yeah, me too.
Speaking of, her work resonating with people, one thing from the praise really jumped out at me.
Yeah.
Someone compared Brené Brown to like an MTV VJ
Oh, wow.
on Headbangers Ball.
What?
I mean, what does that tell you about how people view someone who studies vulnerability?
Well, I think it's fascinating because it's such a juxtaposition,
Yeah.
you know. You have this serious researcher
Yeah.
tackling a topic that makes people squirm.
Right.
It's almost like vulnerability is this taboo thing.
You're like, whoa, you're going there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so one of Brown's central points in Daring Greatly is that vulnerability isn't weakness. In fact, she says, and this is a powerful quote,
Okay.
to feel is to be vulnerable. To believe vulnerability is weakness is to believe that feeling is weakness.
Wow.
Yeah. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that quote really cuts to the core of the issue, you know.
Huh.
We're so conditioned to resist vulnerability because we link it to these uncomfortable emotions.
Right.
Fear, sadness, shame.
Yeah.
But what Brown's research reveals is that vulnerability is the foundation of all emotions. The good stuff, love, joy, creativity.
Right.
All of that stems from vulnerability too.
So it's like we're trying to build this fortress to protect ourselves.
Right.
But in doing so, we're also walling ourselves off from all the good stuff too.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, we're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
All the time. It's part of being human.
It is.
But we've become experts at pretending we're not.
Oh.
And, Brown tells this really relatable story about almost having a panic attack before giving her famous TED Talk.
Oh.
And she's about to, share her research with the world.
Yeah.
And she's terrified.
Right.
It just shows how deeply ingrained that instinct to avoid vulnerability is, even when it can lead to incredible things.
I know. I think we've all had that feeling.
Oh,
like
yeah.
when the stakes are high, you just kind of want to run and hide.
Totally.
And that actually brings us to another major theme in Daring Greatly, the role of shame.
Yeah.
Brown really shines a light on shame as like a driving force behind a lot of our behavior.
For sure. I mean, shame is powerful,
It is.
and it operates below the surface.
Yeah.
Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Wow.
It's that fear of disconnection that can drive so much of what we do.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if shame is this fear of disconnection, how does that play out in our lives?
Well, think about it this way. When we feel shame, our instinct is to hide, withdraw. But the less we talk about shame, the more power it has over us, and it becomes this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And then to protect ourselves from that shame and vulnerability, we develop all these defenses.
Like we're building an arsenal
Exactly.
to fight off these feelings.
Brown uses the analogy of an armory to describe the ways we protect ourselves from vulnerability.
Interesting.
And it's filled with all sorts of weapons,
Okay.
some more obvious than others.
Let's unpack this armory a little bit.
Yeah.
What are some of those weapons that we use to shield ourselves?
So one common weapon is foreboding joy.
Foreboding joy.
Have you ever noticed how some people can't fully enjoy happiness because they're already anticipating something bad happening?
Oh, yeah. I know people like that.
It's like they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's foreboding joy.
Okay.
It's like they can't allow themselves to be present in the joy because they're so afraid of losing it.
Yeah.
And Brown actually suggests that gratitude can be a powerful antidote to foreboding joy.
Really? I'm curious about that. How does that work?
Well, gratitude shifts our focus from scarcity to abundance.
Okay.
So instead of dwelling on potential loss, we're acknowledging the abundance in our lives.
So it's about actively choosing to focus on the positive
Yes.
rather than letting that fear kind of dominate.
It's like a muscle you can strengthen with practice.
Okay.
The more you cultivate it, the more naturally you'll find yourself focusing on the good.
That makes sense.
Another common weapon in the armory is perfectionism.
Oh, perfectionism. I think we've all struggled with that at some point.
It's a very common defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But Brown argues that perfectionism is actually a form of shame. It's driven by that fear of not being good enough.
Right. And the irony is that it often holds us back from achieving our full potential.
Exactly.
Because we're so afraid of making a mistake, we don't take risks. And then there's numbing, which is another big one.
Yes.
This is about using things like work or food or substances.
Right.
To avoid difficult emotions.
Anything that helps us check out.
To disconnect from what we're feeling.
Right. And it can be subtle.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we don't even realize we're numbing out.
Right.
But Brown emphasizes that numbing only provides temporary relief.
Right.
It doesn't actually address the underlying emotions.
So in the long run, it's not a solution.
Yeah, it's like a temporary bandage.
It is.
And Brown actually speaks really candidly about her own struggles with numbing.
Okay.
You know, she used to rely on food and busyness to avoid dealing with those emotions.
Yeah.
But she realized that true healing comes from facing those emotions head on.
That takes courage, but it sounds incredibly liberating, too.
It is, and she talks about the importance of setting boundaries to protect ourselves from oversharing and emotional exhaustion.
Yeah, boundaries are such a big topic these days, especially with,
Especially with technology.
Technology and this pressure to be constantly connected.
Absolutely. And Brown highlights how crucial boundaries are for maintaining our well-being. She gives this example of interviewing high-powered executives who are always on.
I know the type.
Constantly checking email, taking calls, They have no boundaries between their professional and personal lives.
Right, they're completely burnt out.
They're exhausted, and they're definitely numbing out with work.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't truly present in either their work or their personal lives.
It sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
It's like they're addicted to busyness.
It is.
It seems like these three weapons, foreboding joy, perfectionism, and numbing, they all come from the same place.
They do.
That fear of vulnerability.
And Brown actually outlines several other less common but equally potent weapons.
Oh, really?
She talks about things like Viking or victim thinking, letting it all hang out, and serpentining.
Wait, serpentining? What's...
Think of it this way. You're trying to have a serious conversation with someone, but they just keep dodging the topic.
Oh, yeah.
Changing the subject every time you get close to something meaningful.
Oh, I know people who do that.
It's like a frustrating dance where they're constantly slipping away.
It's like they can't handle the intimacy of that conversation.
Exactly.
And then there's cynicism and criticism, which is especially relevant today.
It is.
Especially on social media. It's so much easier to tear other people down.
It is, yeah.
Than to face your own insecurities.
Sadly, that's true.
So as you can see, this vulnerability armory is well stocked.
It is.
We have all sorts of defenses.
We do.
But the cost of carrying all that armor is high.
It is.
Because it prevents us from really experiencing connection and joy.
Exactly. And that's why Brown challenges us to dare greatly.
To dare greatly.
Step out of our comfort zones and embrace vulnerability.
But how do we actually do that? I mean, if we spend our whole lives building this armory, how do we start to dismantle it and show up authentically?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Brown doesn't just leave us with this image of an armory and, tell us to figure it out.
Right.
She gives us tools, real strategies for cultivating what she calls wholehearted living.
So it's about learning to live with more courage.
Yes.
Compassion, connection.
Exactly. And a huge part of that is learning to embrace vulnerability, to recognize it not as weakness, but as like the birthplace of courage, innovation, and connection. She offers these specific strategies for each of those weapons we talked about.
Okay, let's dive into those a little bit.
Okay.
We talked about foreboding joy.
Yeah.
That feeling of dread when something good happens.
Right.
Brown suggests gratitude as an antidote. But how does that actually work?
Gratitude is incredibly powerful.
Okay.
It shifts our focus from scarcity to abundance. It's rewiring our emotional responses.
Okay.
So imagine you land your dream job. Instead of immediately worrying about losing it, you pause.
Okay.
You savor the feeling of accomplishment. You appreciate the opportunity, and you express gratitude for the people who helped you get there.
It's about actively choosing to focus on the positive rather than letting that fear kind of take over.
Exactly. Gratitude is like a muscle.
Okay.
The more you cultivate it, the more you naturally find yourself focusing on the good.
That makes sense.
What about perfectionism? How do we even begin to put down that shield?
Yeah, that feels like it's ingrained in a lot of us.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Perfectionism is a tricky one. It masquerades as striving for excellence.
Right.
But it's actually rooted in fear and shame.
Yeah.
And Brown encourages us to practice self-compassion
Okay.
and challenge those perfectionistic thoughts.
Yeah.
Remind yourself that done is better than perfect.
Right.
Progress is more important than flawlessness.
Easier said than done. Right.
It is. It is.
But I can see how that shift in mindset would be so liberating.
Yeah.
Because we'd be free to experiment,
Right.
to take risks, to learn from our mistakes.
Exactly. And speaking of mistakes,
Okay.
Brown emphasizes the importance of letting our children struggle.
Really?
It might feel counterintuitive,
Mm-hmm.
but giving them the space to grapple with challenges
Mm-hmm.
actually helps them develop resilience and hope.
I mean, it's hard to watch our kids struggle,
Is
but I can see how stepping back and letting them kind of navigate things themselves would be good for them.
Think about it. When you were learning to ride a bike, did someone hold on to you the whole time?
No?
Or did they let go, even though it meant you might fall?
Right. You got to fall to learn.
Those falls, those struggles are what helped you master the skill.
So it's about building that internal strength
Yes.
that comes from overcoming obstacles.
Exactly. And that ties directly into Brown's research on hope.
Okay.
She explains that hope isn't just a feeling, it's a thought process. It's about having the ability to set realistic goals, figure out how to achieve them, and believe in your ability to do so.
So letting kids struggle is actually a way of fostering hope.
It is.
That's interesting.
And it applies to us as adults, too.
Right.
We need to give ourselves permission to struggle.
Yeah.
Fail, learn from those experiences.
Right, to get back up and try again.
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about gratitude as the antidote for foreboding joy.
Yeah.
Self-compassion to combat perfectionism. What about numbing?
Right.
How do we learn to face those difficult emotions?
Yes.
Instead of just trying to escape.
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
Notice when you're reaching for that extra glass of wine, that third hour of scrolling through social media,
Yeah.
that pile of work you're using to distract yourself.
Right.
Ask yourself, what need are you trying to fulfill?
So it's about being mindful of those behaviors.
Yes.
Understanding what's driving them.
Right.
And then creating the space to actually feel those emotions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Brown emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries.
Uh-huh.
Boundaries with work, technology.
I mean, boundaries feel so important now.
They are.
Everyone's constantly connected.
Yeah.
Always on.
Always.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed.
It is.
And just exhausted.
How do we set those boundaries, especially with things like work?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It takes practice,
Okay.
but it's essential for our well-being.
Right.
Think about your workday. Are you constantly checking email, responding to every notification?
Yeah.
Could you set specific times to check email, turn off notifications for a few hours,
Okay.
create a dedicated workspace
Right, like a physical separation.
that allows you to mentally disconnect at the end of the day?
Those are some great tips.
Yeah.
So it's about creating that space for ourselves
Yes.
to recharge and reconnect with what really matters.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Cultivating a sense of worthiness.
Because if we don't believe we're worthy of love and belonging,
Right.
it's going to be hard to embrace vulnerability.
Absolutely, to let
Absolutely.
people in.
Brown emphasizes that worthiness is our birthright.
Okay.
But somewhere along the way, we internalize messages that tell us we're not good enough, not lovable enough, not worthy.
Right. And those messages become part of our armor.
They do.
A way to protect ourselves from hurt.
Exactly. And dismantling that armor requires us to challenge those negative beliefs.
Okay.
Cultivate a more compassionate inner voice.
So it's an inside job.
It is.
Changing the way we talk to ourselves.
Yes.
The way we see ourselves.
It is. And it's a lifelong practice.
Yeah.
Noticing those negative thoughts and consciously replacing them with more positive, affirming ones.
Okay.
Celebrating your strengths, acknowledging your accomplishments,
Right.
treating yourself with kindness and compassion,
Yeah. With the same kindness and compassion you would offer a friend.
Exactly.
It seems like cultivating that sense of worthiness.
Yes.
It's crucial for both ourselves and our children.
Right. We can't give our children what we don't have.
We cannot.
And if we want to raise kids who are brave, resilient, compassionate,
Yes.
we need to model those qualities for them.
Exactly. And that modeling starts with daring greatly ourselves. Stepping into the arena of life with our whole hearts, even when it feels scary.
Right. Even when it feels uncertain.
Exactly. And Brown reminds us we don't have to be perfect to be worthy.
Yeah.
In fact, it's our imperfections that make us human, that make us relatable,
Right.
that allow us to connect with others on a deeper level.
And speaking of connection,
Yeah.
in Daring Greatly. Brown talks about how her research journey actually started with a desire to understand connection,
Okay.
not shame.
Yeah.
What do you think that tells us about the relationship between vulnerability and connection?
I think it speaks volumes. I mean, connection requires vulnerability.
Hmm.
We can't truly connect with others if we're not willing to let them see our true selves,
Our imperfections.
imperfections and all.
Yeah.
So it's like shame research found her.
Right, yeah.
It was an unexpected but essential part of understanding how we build and maintain those meaningful relationships.
It highlights that connection isn't just about the good times, right?
It's
It's about being there for each other.
Yeah.
During the tough times,
Yeah.
the messy times,
The hard time.
when we feel most vulnerable.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up this section,
Okay.
I want to share one final thought from Daring Greatly that really resonated with me.
Okay.
Brown writes, "Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable." What are your thoughts on that?
That quote speaks to the heart of what it means to dare greatly.
It does.
It's a reminder that vulnerability isn't something to be feared,
Right.
but something to be embraced.
Yeah.
It's through vulnerability that we experience the fullness of life and the richness of connection.
Beautifully said. So we've explored some of the key strategies Brown offers for daring greatly.
Yes.
We've talked about gratitude, self-compassion, setting boundaries, cultivating a sense of worthiness.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's one more piece we need to discuss,
Yep.
and that's this idea of being in the arena.
Yes. Brown quotes Theodore Roosevelt in Daring Greatly.
Okay.
And that quote is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that passage about the man in the arena, the one who's actually striving, daring, maybe even failing.
Right. But fully engaged.
Yes, fully engaged in life.
That quote perfectly captures the essence of Brown's message.
I think so, too.
It's not about, winning
Right.
or being perfect.
Uh-huh.
It's about having the courage to show up,
Right.
to be seen,
To be seen, yeah.
and to engage fully,
Yeah.
even when it's messy.
Even when it's hard.
It's about being in the game, not on the sidelines.
Totally.
And that takes vulnerability, right?
It does.
Because putting yourself out there
Mhm.
means risking criticism,
Yeah.
judgment, even failure.
Absolutely. And Brown acknowledges that daring greatly is risky.
Okay.
It means opening ourselves up to the possibility of getting hurt.
Yeah.
But she argues that playing it safe,
Right.
staying on the sidelines, is actually far more dangerous.
Right, because when we close ourselves off from vulnerability,
Yeah.
we close ourselves off from everything else too.
We do. We close ourselves off from love, belonging, and joy.
It's a powerful reminder that playing small
Yeah.
doesn't protect us from pain.
It doesn't.
It just prevents us from experiencing the fullness of life.
Absolutely. And I think that's why Brown's work resonates with so many people.
I agree.
She gives us permission to be human,
Yeah.
to embrace our imperfections,
To be imperfect.
and to recognize that vulnerability is not a weakness.
But a strength.
It's a strength.
I think what I appreciate most about her work is that it's not just theoretical.
Yeah.
It's grounded in her own experiences,
Exactly.
her own struggles.
Her own journey.
Yeah, and she's not afraid to be vulnerable herself.
No.
To share her own stories of falling down and getting back up.
And that makes her message so much more authentic and relatable.
Right, it makes you feel like you're not alone on this journey.
Exactly.
That we all have those moments of self-doubt, those fears.
You do.
Yeah, those insecurities.
And that's the beauty of vulnerability.
Yeah,
It creates connection.
it does.
It allows us to see ourselves reflected in others and to realize that we're all in this together.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Daring Greatly, I'm curious what stands out to you
Okay.
from all of this. What are you taking away from Brown's work and her message?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that worthiness is not something we earn
Okay.
or achieve.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we already possess.
It's our birthright.
It is. It's our birthright. And when we connect with that sense of inherent worthiness,
Yeah,
it becomes easier to embrace vulnerability,
right.
to show up authentically in our relationships,
Mm.
and just to live with more courage and compassion.
That's a powerful reminder. And for our listener who has clearly chosen to dive deep into this topic,
Yeah.
I want to leave them with this question.
Okay.
If vulnerability is truly the birthplace of so many things we crave in life, love, joy, creativity, connection, What small step can you take today to embrace it a little more?
Maybe it's having an honest conversation with a loved one
Yeah.
about something that's been weighing on your heart.
Right.
Maybe it's trying something new that scares you,
Hmm.
even if you're not sure you'll succeed. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's just allowing yourself to feel a difficult emotion
Right.
without judgment, without trying to push it away.
Every act of courage, no matter how small, chips away at that armor
It does.
and helps us to cultivate a more wholehearted life.
It does.
So, to our listener, I'll echo Brown's words.
Okay.
Dare greatly, my friend.
We got this.
You've got this.
Did you get any of that?